January 1st, 1945. Alsace, France. The temperature hovers somewhere below freezing, well below, and dawn breaks gray over the Vosges Mountains. In a frozen foxhole near the German border, an American soldier from the 45th Infantry Division stamps his feet, trying to force circulation back into limbs gone numb hours ago. His wool trench coat, soaked through from yesterday's snowfall, offers little protection. Leather boots, stiff with ice, feel more like iron shackles than footwear. He doesn't know it yet, but in less than 3 hours, Hitler's final major offensive of the war will come crashing down on his position. The plan had a name: Nordwind, North Wind, an apt designation for an operation designed to freeze American ambitions in their tracks. 20 days earlier, the Wehrmacht had launched its desperate gamble in the Ardennes, the operation the world would remember as the Battle of the Bulge. Panzers punched through American lines in Belgium, threatening to split the Allied armies in two. By December 26th, that offensive had reached its culminating point, the moment when an attacking force exhausts its combat power and can advance no further. But Hitler wasn't finished. Not yet. His strategic vision, however distorted by desperation, identified a critical vulnerability in the Allied position. As General George Patton's Third Army wheeled north to counterattack the Bulge's southern shoulder, it left behind a dangerously thin defensive line. The responsibility for covering that abandoned frontage fell to the U.S. Seventh Army, already stretched across Alsace like canvas, pulled too tight over a frame. Something had to give. Hitler saw his opportunity. 2 mechanized divisions sitting idle near Monschau, Germany, uncommitted to the Ardennes offensive due to the stubborn American defense on the northern shoulder. Fresh troops, armored teeth, and a weakened American position practically begging to be exploited. The objective was ambitious, perhaps even delusional: thrust into Alsace, cut off or surround substantial American and French forces, threaten Patton's rear, and, if the gods of war smiled, capture the symbolic city of Strasbourg. The city where, just 2 months earlier, the French tricolour had been raised over the cathedral for the first time since 1940, fulfilling a promise Free French troops had made in the deserts of North Africa years before. Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower wasn't blind to Hitler's intentions. Ultra-intercepts, those priceless decrypted German radio transmissions courtesy of British codebreakers, had picked up hints of something brewing, but the intelligence was sketchy, incomplete, like trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. The exact size and strength of the attacking German forces remained hidden in the fog of war. Having been caught flat-footed once in the Ardennes, Eisenhower wasn't about to make the same mistake twice. He ordered General Jacob Devers, commander of the 6th Army Group, to execute a retrograde movement, military parlance for a fighting withdrawal, from exposed positions in northern Alsace. The plan made cold, hard, tactical sense. Shorten the defensive line, comb out troops for Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force Reserve, and occupy more defensible positions along the east-facing crest of the Vosges Mountains. There was just one problem. The French said no. When French commanders received Eisenhower's withdrawal order, their response was immediate and unequivocal. Non, not just military objection, outright refusal. General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny's French First Army would not abandon Strasbourg, regardless of the tactical logic. The city wasn't just another dot on a military map, it was a symbol, a promise kept, a matter of national honor. And there was something else, something darker. Alsace and Lorraine hadn't simply been occupied during the war. They'd been reincorporated into the Third Reich. Unlike the rest of France, where citizens endured occupation but remained French, Alsatians had been made German subjects. They'd been conscripted into Hitler's legions. They'd lived under the shadow of Natzweiler, the concentration camp that persecuted dissidents without regard to ethnicity. When liberation came in November, Alsatian civilians, many of ethnic German ancestry, had celebrated perhaps too exuberantly for their former master's comfort. French commanders knew with absolute certainty what would happen if German forces retook Strasbourg: retribution, swift, brutal, and total. The argument escalated. Eisenhower pressed his military logic. French commanders countered with threats to withdraw their forces from Allied control entirely. A bluff, perhaps, but one Charles de Gaulle would make good approximately 20 years later when France left NATO's integrated military command. The diplomatic crisis threatened to fracture Allied unity at the worst possible moment. Devers, caught squarely in the middle, did what good commanders do when faced with impossible choices. He improvised. He issued orders for a partial withdrawal, shifted responsibility for Strasbourg's defense to French forces containing the Colmar pocket to the south, and released the desired reserves to Eisenhower's control. But his two American corps, Lieutenant General Wade Heislip's 15th Corps west of the Vosges, and Major General Edward Brooks's 6th Corps east of the mountains, would stay as far forward as possible, holding ground until the Germans forced them back. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, which probably meant it was the right decision. New Year's Day, 1945, 0 hour. German artillery erupted along a front stretching from the Saar Valley to the Rhine River. Lieutenant General Hans von Obstfelder's First Army surged south out of Germany in a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm American defenses through sheer momentum and violence of action. But coordination, as it turned out, was precisely what the German offensive lacked. Unsure whether to concentrate west of the Vosges, attacking up the Saar Valley, or in the mountains themselves, taking advantage of rugged terrain as they had in the Ardennes, German planners hedged their bets. They split their advance along both axes, diluting both. It was the kind of compromise that sounds reasonable in a conference room, but proves fatal on the battlefield. In the west, the 17th SS Panzer Division and 36th Volksgrenadier Division crashed into positions held by the American 44th and 100th Divisions near Rimling. The attacks were fierce, determined, and ineffective. American defenders, fighting from prepared positions in terrain they knew, barely gave ground. What little the Germans gained was retaken within days. In the mountains, 4 Volksgrenadier divisions struck a lightly defended sector, screened by the 106th Cavalry Group. Here the Germans found softer resistance. The cavalry, outnumbered and outgunned, gave ground steadily toward the town of Wingen-sur-Moder, trading space for time, falling back through deep snow and pine forests that seemed to swallow entire battalions. But at Wingen, the retreat stopped. The 45th Infantry Division, those same soldiers shivering in frozen foxholes on New Year's Day, blocked the German advance cold. Von Obstfelder, sensing his offensive losing momentum before it had properly begun, committed his reserve. The 6th SS Mountain Division just arrived from Finland. These were different soldiers. Hardened by years of fighting in the Arctic, equipped with proper winter gear, accustomed to temperatures that would incapacitate other troops, the mountain troops hit the 45th Division like an avalanche. They mauled an entire battalion of the 157th Infantry, nearly destroying it as a combat-effective unit. But they couldn't break through. By January 5th, von Obstfelder's initial attack had been mostly contained. American casualties were moderate. German gains were minimal. Most importantly, Third Army continued hammering the Bulge without requiring reinforcement or diversion. Hitler's gamble was failing. But Hitler, as he'd demonstrated repeatedly throughout the war, didn't accept failure gracefully. Across the Rhine, SS Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler commanded Army Group Oberrhein, Upper Rhine, occupying the Colmar Pocket south of Strasbourg. Himmler was a political loyalist with scant military training or ability, the kind of commander who owed his position to party membership rather than competence. He was supposed to coordinate with von Obstfelder's attack, launching simultaneous assaults to overwhelm American defenses through multiple penetrations. Instead, inevitable delays in getting his forces into position allowed General Alexander Patch, commanding the 7th Army, to shift infantry regiments away from the Rhine's banks to reinforce the Vosges near Vingen. When Himmler's forces finally entered the battle, days late, they achieved only limited gains north and south of Strasbourg. Americans to the north ceded approximately 10 miles around Gamsheim, a tactical withdrawal to more defensible positions rather than a defeat. Hitler's response to this stalled, disjointed offensive was to commit his last significant reserves in the west, the 21st Panzer and 25th Panzer Grenadier Divisions, the two mechanized formations that had been unable to participate in the Bulge due to the strong American defense at Monschau. On January 7th, these divisions struck south between the Vosges and the Rhine toward the Haguenau forest. The fighting around the villages of Hatten and Rittershofen was sharp, vicious, the kind of close-quarters combat where artillery reduced stone buildings to rubble and machine guns turned village squares into killing grounds. The 10th SS Panzer Division and 7th Parachute Division added their weight to the assault, pushing XV Corps back to the Moder River. It was the most successful German penetration of the entire offensive, and it still wasn't enough. To shore up the line, one of Supreme Headquarters' precious reserve divisions was committed. The 101st Airborne, recently relieved from its heroic defense of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. The Screaming Eagles, as they were known, were exhausted, under strength, and in desperate need of rest and refit. They fought anyway, helping to stabilize the Moder River line and prevent any German breakthrough toward Strasbourg. Again, the Germans had dented Allied defenses. Again, they'd failed to break through or inflict substantial casualties. Again, they'd accomplished nothing to effect operations reducing the Bulge pocket to the north. Throughout the battle, soldiers on both sides fought two enemies, each other and the weather. Temperatures remained below freezing throughout January, often dipping well into the teens and single digits at night. Cloudy European winter skies offered no warmth from the sun, no respite from the cold that seeped through wool and leather into bones and soles. Allied troops, still lacking adequate winter clothing despite months of experience with European winters, suffered terribly. Wool trench coats soaked through and froze stiff. Leather boots, designed for garrison duty or temperate climates, provided virtually no insulation against snow and ice. Frostbite claimed fingers and toes with the same efficiency as German bullets claimed lives. German forces, particularly those redeployed from Finland, fared better. Their winter equipment was superior, their acclimatization to cold more complete. But even they struggled with conditions that seemed designed to punish human ambition. Deep snow-restricted movement, channeling advances into predictable routes. Vehicles slid off icy tracks on steep, forested trails, becoming obstacles rather than assets. Artillery pieces froze, requiring hours of maintenance before they could fire. Wounded soldiers died not from their injuries but from exposure, unable to survive the journey to aid stations. The fallen were soon covered by new snowfalls, white shrouds that would remain until spring thaw revealed the winter's grim harvest. Throughout Alsace, civilians suffered alongside soldiers. Constant fire shattered homes, displacing families into the same wintry conditions that challenged trained troops. Villages changed hands multiple times, each occupation bringing new dangers, new deprivations. For everyone caught in Nordwind's maelstrom, the battle became as much about survival as victory. In the bitterly cold weeks following the initial assault, German forces launched local counterattacks attempting to exploit any perceived weakness, straighten bulges in their own lines, prepare for renewed offensive operations. None succeeded in gaining significant ground. Hitler couldn't commit new forces to sustain the offensive. On January 12th, the Soviet Union launched its massive winter offensive in Poland, the Vistula-Oder operation, which would carry the Red Army to within 40 miles of Berlin by February. Every available German division, every reserve battalion, every last man who could hold a rifle was needed in the east. The Reich was burning, and Hitler had to choose which fires to fight. Nordwind sputtered, stalled, and died not with dramatic defeat, but with quiet exhaustion. Allied divisions, rebuilt after their mauling in the Bulge, including the 28th Infantry Division, which had been nearly destroyed in the Ardennes, moved south to support French First Army efforts to finally eliminate the Colmar pocket. By the end of January, the last German forces would be driven from French soil, the Rhine secured, and the stage set for the final Allied drive into Germany itself. The final accounting was brutal in its efficiency. Attacking German forces lost over 22,000 troops, killed, wounded, or captured. Allied casualties numbered nearly 11,000 Rs, substantial, but significantly lower than their adversaries. More importantly, American and French forces had prevented any significant loss of territory, kept Patton's Third Army focused on reducing the Bulge, and demonstrated that even overstretched and inexperienced American divisions could hold their own against veteran German formations when the odds were even. The battle proved something else, something often overlooked in histories dominated by more famous names and larger battles. General Jacob Devers was one of the better field commanders the United States produced during the war. His skillful shifting of forces to meet each German assault in turn, his diplomatic navigation of Franco-American tensions during the Strasbourg crisis, his ability to improvise when faced with impossible demands from higher headquarters, all marked him as a commander of exceptional ability. History, however, is written by the victorious but remembered by the famous. Devers's place is frequently overshadowed by more celebrated generals like Patton, Bradley, and Montgomery. Similarly, the substantial French contribution, troops from Algeria, Morocco, Senegal, and other nations holding valuable miles of Allied frontage in the debilitating European winter, is often lost in the noise of the more dramatic Battle of the Bulge. But make no mistake, Nordwind was a major German offensive with the potential to inflict an embarrassing defeat and upset the timetable for victory. That it failed was not inevitable or foreordained. It failed because American soldiers, cold, tired, often inadequately equipped, stood their ground in frozen foxholes and burning villages. It failed because French forces refused to abandon civilians who'd already suffered 4 years of occupation. It failed because commanders like Devers and Patch recognized what needed to be done and did it, regardless of the challenges. On that frozen New Year's Day, when German artillery shattered the pre-dawn silence and Hitler committed his last significant reserves to one final gamble in the West, the outcome was far from certain. The Allies were stretched thin, diplomatically divided, still reeling from the surprise in the Ardennes. German forces were experienced, determined, and fighting on terrain that favored defense as much as offense. What decided the battle wasn't superior numbers. The forces were relatively even. It wasn't superior equipment. German tanks remained formidable. their infantry as skilled as any in Europe. It wasn't even superior generalship, though Devers and Patch performed admirably. What decided Operation Nordwind was the cumulative weight of 1,000 small decisions made by soldiers whose names history never recorded. The machine gunner who held his position in Hatton until his ammunition was exhausted, then held longer with a rifle scavenged from a fallen comrade. The forward observer who called artillery fire on his own position to break up a German assault. The medic who dragged wounded men through snow under fire. The infantryman in that frozen foxhole near Wingen who stamped his feet to keep circulation going. Then shouldered his M1 Garand when the attack came and did his job. Hitler's last offensive in the West failed because American soldiers fighting alongside French allies made it fail. They stopped Nordwind cold in the Vosges Mountains and the Alsatian plain, bought time for the Bulge to be reduced, and ensured that when the final Allied offensive began in the spring, it would launch from positions of strength rather than crisis. 4 months later, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe was over. And among the many campaigns and battles that led to that victory, the defense of Alsace in January 1945 stands as an important, if unappreciated, chapter in the story of how the Third Reich was defeated. The soldier in that frozen foxhole probably never knew how close Hitler came to changing the war's trajectory. He was too busy trying to stay warm, stay alive, and do his duty. In the end, that was enough.